let's just kind of look at a 20 by 20. I mean, that's not a huge family garden, but it's not a small one either. I mean, you can produce a lot of food on a little piece of land like that when you're using these methods. So here's a little bit of a closer view. So we're looking at the 20 by 20, which is roughly 400 square feet. That gives us 5 beds, which would be the market gardener beds. The beds are 30-inch wide, that's what we work off of. And there's 18-inch walk paths in between it. So that puts everything on a 4-foot center. So in between each of these rows, if you go from middle walkway to middle walkway, you're looking at 4 foot. Nice, easy number, easy to lay out. There's people that make their walkways thinner, but then you get into more math where you're looking at a 10-inch walkway and a 30-inch bed, and all of a sudden you got 50 inches, and you got to multiply that across when you're dealing with feet and inches, and it just becomes a pain. Another thing about the 4 foot on center structure of this is that it allows you a nice walk path to be able to move around. The 30-inch bed is specifically for the reason of you can straddle over it, simply spread your feet across. You don't have to be out wide, and then you can work the bed in between you. That's where the main premise of that comes in from. I would go down further, but I threw up my back last week, or 2 weeks ago, so. Doing absolutely nothing, by the way. I've been over to grab a bag of chicken feed, and I never made it to the chicken feed. Okay, but before we go into the actual planning of the garden, we need to discuss more about the location of your garden itself. And this is one of the biggest factors you really need to focus down on before you start anything. Number one, you have rocks. I know around here we don't have all that much stone on at least the flatter areas, but if you get up on any of the hills or any of the bluffs around here, you are going to have a hard time really working in a garden. Trees. Any trees to the south of your area are going to block out tons of light that you're going to need for your garden to grow. Another one to really take into account is weed pressures. If you're using old cropland that has a lot of weeds on it, grass is a major weed, which I'll kind of talk about later on today, especially if you have any kind of rhizome grass, your whether it be your zoysias, I don't know what the other one is. I want to say it's a crabgrass, but it's not a crabgrass. But those ones that kind of grow in a mat, they don't actually grow up. Bermuda, that's the other big one, yes. Bermuda and zoysia, they will make it impossible to grow in because it stays underground, it's based off the roots, and it will continuously come up. About the only way to get rid of it is either you have to tarp it for 2 years, which is basically big giant plastic black silage tarps, or use like a glyphosate. I mean, I don't recommend anything to be used that is chemical because we are certified naturally grown, which means we use all organic inputs on our farm. Everything we use is OMRI listed. So I don't recommend it, but if you have a challenge like that, that is one of the only times I'd ever suggest doing that because you'll never be able to fight it. I mean, it's not worth the battle. Other things to consider. This is actually on my plot of land here, and this is facing south. Everybody knows where the wind comes from during the spring, summer, and fall around here. It's from the south. We actually have wind fences set up periodically across the property to fight that hole there. I mean, because when the wind blows out there. My plot of land's actually in an old cornfield. So back behind where I grew up at, there is a old farm field back there. This plot right here is a 12-acre plot. It was Monsanto corn, soybeans for the past, 20 years, 30 years that they've been doing that. Before that, it's been farmed back to about the 1850s. The one issue I have is I have that corner kind of cut out there because we don't own past basically where the hay bales are out there. It's about where our property line is. So past that is the other farmers. The wind comes up over that hill and around that hill and then funnels through there and it intensifies across the property. That's one of our biggest challenges. I mean, when you go out to harvest something on a windy day and you put your tote down and you turn around and you go back to it and it's now 30 feet away, it becomes a huge challenge. So ideally, you want to be back behind a tree block, but not close enough to the tree block to have it shade out your crop. And you kind of got to watch it. I mean, you got to use some judgment and, watch it over a season. If you get too close, move it back a little bit. The other thing that's really, really important is considerations of power and especially water. Power, not so much necessary. It's more for convenience if you're really getting into doing, if you want to try to heat something just temporarily or running germination chambers or anything like that. But water is very important. In our area especially, it gets dry. From, let's see, July to about September, it rained twice this year. So we got a whopping quarter of an inch of rain. Without irrigation, you cannot really do anything like this. The thing still grew, but the yields were horrible. I mean, when you only get 10 tomatoes a week off of a 90-foot row, then you definitely have to irrigate to get something back out of it. The other important thing is drainage. If you have anywhere that has a low spot in it that dips down in any kind of bowl of any kind, you do not want to be in that area because it'll retain the water. I mean, the majority of the soil we have around here drains fairly well, especially if you're down on the river bottom and you have more of the sandy type, Play-Doh-y type soil. But everywhere else around here, like where I'm at, I've got heavy clay, which is a silty, loamy, heavy clay, which I don't know what all that means, but it's got a really good nutrient capacity. But if I get a dip, it'll hold water for 2 or 3 days before it drains out. And that's even in the areas that I've really worked in and have good experience with. So, I mean, if you do have areas like that, you really just got to kind of form the land. You got to get drainage ditches dug, or just don't grow on them to start with. Just choose a better location. That's one of the most important parts.